Hey everyone, tonight we're going to ease into the fascinating story of Homo neanderthalensis. These incredibly robust and intelligent relatives of ours didn't just survive the Ice Age, they truly thrived in it. From their astonishing strength to their surprisingly rich culture, Neanderthals were far more than simple cavemen. They were, in many ways, nature's most effective cold weather specialists, with an unexpected appreciation for their surroundings. Before you settle in completely, please take a moment to gently tap that like button and consider subscribing if you find genuine enjoyment in these stories. Also, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always quite interesting to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, perhaps dim the lights, maybe turn on a quiet fan for that subtle background hum, and let's gently drift into tonight's historical journey together. Imagine stepping into Ice Age Europe around 80,000 years ago. You'd likely freeze solid within 30 seconds. But before that happened, you might just glimpse a Neanderthal. They were the dominant human-like species of the region, and quite possibly the only creature on Earth who appeared capable of winning a wrestling match against a mammoth. Neanderthals weren't merely different from modern humans. They were specifically designed to withstand extreme hardship. Picture a person crafted by a team of dedicated bodybuilders, meticulous Arctic engineers, and someone with a distinct fondness for prominent foreheads. That, my friends, is a Neanderthal. Let's begin by examining their physique. Neanderthals were, on average, shorter than us, typically ranging from about 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 6 inches. However, simply calling them short can be misleading. They weren't small, they were incredibly dense and compact. Their frames were stocky, with immense rib cages, broad shoulders, and a build so remarkably sturdy it seemed as though their skeletons had been reinforced for heavy-duty work. Their bones were exceptionally thick, remarkably dense, and quite frankly, overqualified for anything less demanding than taking down a full-grown mammoth. Their limbs were short and powerful, a design that efficiently helped conserve heat in the brutally cold climates they inhabited. Their hands were notably large, featuring strong thumbs, perfect for crafting tools, securing prey, or, one might presume, opening stubborn pickle jars that modern humans wouldn't even attempt. And then, there was their face. It wasn't Neanderthals who looked unusual. It's us who look unusual. Their skulls were long and low, featuring prominent brow ridges that could have easily served as miniature ski jumps. Their noses were large and projected forward, possibly acting as a built-in heater for the frosty Ice Age air. Their jaws were incredibly powerful, their chins virtually absent, and their typical expressions likely fell somewhere between a mild state of confusion and a perpetual readiness for a challenge. But let there be no misunderstanding. These were not brutish thugs. This wasn't a flawed early version of humanity. Instead, it was a parallel success story. They were perfectly adapted, from head to toe, for their environment, and within that challenging world, they truly flourished. Neanderthals were the elite endurance athletes of their era. If that era included relentless ice storms, formidable cave bears, and the daily necessity of hunting dinner with a sharpened stick, then they were perfectly suited. Every inch of their being seemed to declare, yes, I've broken several ribs, and then, no, I don't regret it. If you've ever felt a sense of accomplishment about your bone density after lifting a milk jug without discomfort, please have a seat. Neanderthals were quite literally walking fortresses. Their skeletons weren't just sturdy, they possessed a medieval, architectural level of sturdiness. We're talking about bones so remarkably thick, they make modern human femurs appear akin to disposable chopsticks. Let's start with their legs. Neanderthal femurs were short and incredibly robust. They weren't designed for running marathons, but rather for powering through challenging mountainous terrain while potentially carrying the equivalent of half a reindeer on one shoulder. Their knees were specifically shaped to endure constant bending and squatting, a highly useful feature when you spend most of your day constructing fires, shaping stone tools, or working elbow deep in large animal carcasses. Their arms were equally formidable. Their upper arm bones were massively thick, and their forearms were even thicker, a distinctive trait among hominins. This wasn't just for appearances. They weren't simply flexing for prehistoric admiration. They were literally built to wield heavy tools and transport enormous prey across the rugged tundra. If modern humans are designed like a versatile Swiss Army knife, Neanderthals were akin to jackhammers equipped with eyebrows. Even their rib cages reveal a distinct story. Modern humans typically have a more barrel-shaped rib cage, tapering slightly towards the waist. Neanderthals, however, possessed wide, flaring rib cages. This provided ample space for remarkably large lungs, likely a necessity for surviving in the cold, oxygen-thin air of glacial Europe. Essentially, their respiratory system was the biological equivalent of industrial bellows. More oxygen intake meant more energy for chasing mammoths. And let's not overlook their skulls. Beyond those magnificent brow ridges, their skulls were longer, flatter, and noticeably thicker. They also featured larger areas for muscle attachment, indicating powerful jaws and neck muscles. They could probably chew frozen venison without so much as a blink. Interestingly, this exceptionally reinforced skeleton came with a trade-off. They likely matured more rapidly than us and may have had slightly shorter lifespans. However, during their time, they experienced a lifetime of bruises, fractures, and demanding living in every single year. Their bones consistently display evidence of wear, healed fractures, joint damage, and blunt force trauma, almost as if they were perpetually auditioning for a prehistoric action film. Now let's address the most significant intellectual aspect. Neanderthals possessed remarkably large brains. Not metaphorically, but literally. Their brains were larger than ours, averaging approximately 1,500 cubic centimeters compared to our modern average of 1,350 cubic centimeters. That's right. These so-called brute cavemen were walking around with high-performance cranial engines, and they didn't even have spreadsheets to endure. However, before we prematurely crown them honorary professors, a disclaimer: a larger brain doesn't automatically equate to superior intelligence. A blue whale, for instance, possesses a massive brain, yet it has not yet managed to invent indoor plumbing. That being said, Neanderthals were not simply carrying around inactive cranial ballast. They actively utilized their large brains. A substantial portion of their brain volume was dedicated to sensory processing and motor skills, particularly vision and movement coordination. This makes perfect sense when your daily routine involves stealthily tracking elk in a snowstorm and diligently avoiding accidentally walking off a cliff. They needed to skillfully navigate perilous terrain, track animals over extensive distances, and proficiently work with tools, all without the convenience of Google Maps or the ability to scroll through Instagram. Their visual cortex was particularly expansive, likely granting them incredibly sharp eyesight. Picture sharp-eyed, frost-covered Neanderthals dramatically squinting into a blizzard, much like Ice Age anime characters, but with more fur and fewer long monologues. And while their prefrontal cortex, the part that helps us think before we act, might have been proportionally smaller than ours, there's compelling evidence that they weren't simply acting on raw impulse. Their lives demanded careful planning, significant cooperation, and a surprising amount of creativity. This included the kind of creativity that leads to painting cave walls and quite possibly applying ochre pigment like early forms of makeup. So yes, your ancient Neanderthal relative may have been pioneering contouring long before TikTok ever existed. Neanderthals also demonstrated impressive adaptability across diverse environments in Europe and parts of Asia, from dry steppes to icy tundras. This required serious cognitive flexibility. They skillfully learned to utilize local resources, construct shelters, create tools, and occasionally invent novel ways to injure themselves with flint. Still not convinced? Consider this. We once believed that all their sophisticated tools and art were merely borrowed ideas from early modern humans. Then we discovered Neanderthal art and ornaments that were demonstrably older than anything Homo sapiens had produced in the region. It turns out, we were just late to the cave party. If nature were to host a survive the worst conditions imaginable design contest, Neanderthals would undoubtedly have walked away with the grand prize, and likely the trophy too, probably to use it as a hammer. These early humans weren't just adapted to the Ice Age, they were specifically engineered for it. Imagine the kind of weather that causes your nose hairs to freeze, and now envision living in that without heated floors, comfortable hoodies, or any concept of hot cocoa. That's Neanderthal territory. Their bodies were short and stocky, not by chance, but by deliberate design. This compact shape was instrumental in helping them conserve body heat, which is precisely what you need when your environment resembles the freezer aisle of a rather cursed grocery store. Long, slender limbs tend to lose heat more quickly. Neanderthals possessed limbs so remarkably thick and short that even penguins would have offered a nod of approval. Their noses were notably massive, and no, not for simply sniffing out gossip. Their large nasal cavities served to warm and humidify frigid air before it reached their lungs. It was nature's built-in HVAC system, integrated directly into their faces, a truly useful adaptation, and a great excuse for having a face robust enough to rest a brick upon. Even their skin likely contributed to their exceptional icy resilience. While we cannot ascertain exact pigmentation, most scientists generally agree that they probably possessed lighter skin tones. This would have allowed for more efficient synthesis of vitamin D in low-light conditions, because if you're going to endure 6 months of perpetual gloom, you'd better be able to extract sunshine from a gray sky. Their lungs were also likely enormous, necessary to fuel bodies engaged in constant manual labor, 24/7. This included climbing, hunting, hauling, carving, and occasionally inventing new ways to pull a muscle. That wide, barrel-shaped chest wasn't merely for aesthetics, it was a prehistoric furnace. And clothing? Oh yes, they weren't running around in mere fur loincloths, unless of course that was their particular preference. Evidence strongly suggests that Neanderthals wore stitched hides to insulate themselves from the intense cold. And stitching isn't a simple task. It implies they planned ahead, created specialized tools, and likely possessed some version of both serious winter wear and slightly less intense cold weather attire. In essence, Neanderthals weren't just barely surviving the Ice Age, they were masterfully thriving within it. They weren't nature's underdogs, they were nature's snowplows, expertly designed to march through the bitter cold, perhaps grunting softly, and possibly wondering why the mammoths always had to be so dramatic about it all. When you envision Neanderthal fashion, you might picture a single fur casually draped over one shoulder, perhaps held in place by a piece of vine, accessorized with a club, and a general lack of self-awareness. However, actual Neanderthal clothing was surprisingly sophisticated. Primitive, certainly, but with far more practical function than mere flair, and just enough cleverness to make a medieval tailor shed a tear. Let's be clear, Ice Age Europe was not an ideal place to experiment with minimalist fashion. If you ventured outside in winter wearing only optimism and positive vibes, you'd be frozen solid before you could even utter saber-toothed mistake. So Neanderthals became exceptionally resourceful. Evidence suggests they didn't just wrap themselves in animal skins like discarded couch covers. They painstakingly processed hides, softened them, and meticulously stitched them together using bone needles. That's right, they were hand-sewing intricate outfits from deer and mammoth hides long before buttons were even conceived. And they didn't even complain about it on Reddit. And let's talk about their accessories. Some Neanderthal archaeological sites contain intriguing items like eagle talons, pierced shells, and beads. These weren't strictly functional, which implies they appreciated a little flair, perhaps a touch of symbolism, or even some Ice Age swagger. Imagine a Neanderthal confidently walking into camp, perhaps declaring, "Yes, this claw necklace is genuine. Yes, I personally caught the bird. No, you may not touch it." They also utilized ochre, a naturally occurring red pigment, on their tools, bodies, and possibly even their faces. Was it war paint, decoration, some form of social signal? No one knows for certain, but it does indicate that at some point a Neanderthal looked at a red rock and thought, "This would look absolutely incredible on my cheekbones." Were they prepared for Fashion Week? Not unless the runway was blanketed in snow, illuminated by firelight, and immediately followed by an intense hunt. But their clothing admirably served its purpose. It kept them warm, reasonably dry, and protected from both the harsh weather and any judgmental Homo sapiens. Let's also not overlook the sheer practical brilliance. Every outfit was biodegradable, locally sourced, and well, cruelty-based because of the hunting, but ultimately sustainable Ice Age fashion. Neanderthals weren't merely strong. They possessed the kind of strength that would allow them to punch a woolly rhino in the face. the sort of strength that makes you question whether the laws of physics were functioning differently back then, or if they were simply born with a natural, lifelong gym membership to the universe. Everything about their anatomy powerfully conveys strength. Their muscle mass was colossal, particularly in the shoulders, arms, and legs, areas crucial for daily tasks like hurling spears, skinning animals, hauling carcasses, and perhaps even moving boulders for sheer amusement. Their bone structure, as we've already discussed, was robust enough to support a small siege engine, which means those muscles weren't for mere display. They were built for genuine, functional power. But just how strong were they, really? Estimates suggest that a Neanderthal male could be up to 50% stronger than a modern human of the same size, and in terms of upper body strength, potentially even double that. This isn't just farm strong or dad strong. This is accidentally rip the door off your cave strong. They didn't merely hunt from a distance with carefully aimed projectiles. No, Neanderthals favored a close contact approach. They would bravely approach large, potentially aggressive Ice Age megafauna and jab them with spears at nearly point-blank range. Their version of dinner preparation involved deftly dodging tusks while maintaining a firm grip on something that very much wanted them dead. And the wear and tear on their bodies? Oh, it certainly shows. Their fossil records are replete with healed injuries, broken arms, crushed ribs, damaged skulls. These are all clear indicators that they were not only incredibly strong, but also remarkably resilient. If a Neanderthal broke something, they either walked it off or wrapped it in moss and hoped for the best. Then they would typically return directly to hunting. Even their grip strength was reportedly absurd. Some researchers believe they could easily crush modern human hands without even trying. Their thumbs were larger, their fingers broader, and their knuckles capable of inflicting damage typically reserved for medieval weaponry. If you're envisioning The Rock, but fuzzier and more likely to hurl a stone axe at you, you're not far off. If there's one consistent message conveyed by Neanderthal fossils, it's that these individuals lived incredibly demanding lives. Not merely in the sense of forgot to wear sunscreen hard, but more akin to tackled a raging bison before lunch hard. Their skeletons read less like tranquil prehistoric memoirs and more like detailed accident reports from an Ice Age rodeo. Seriously, when paleoanthropologists meticulously examined the trauma patterns in Neanderthal remains, they uncovered something oddly familiar. The types of injuries, fractured ribs, broken arms, crushed faces, were strikingly similar to those commonly found in professional rodeo riders. And no, that is not a jest. Apparently, if you regularly contend with one-ton mammals for your livelihood, your bones tend to narrate a very specific kind of story. Consider the example of Shanadar 1. This unfortunate individual sustained a blow to the head that crushed a portion of his skull, likely leaving him partially blind. He also had a withered right arm, probably the result of a healed fracture. His foot was also damaged. Essentially, he was the ancient human equivalent of a walking before photo in an orthopedic advertisement. And yet, he survived for years after enduring these severe injuries. This implies that other Neanderthals actively cared for him, because apparently, even if you are a human tank with one functioning eye and a limp, your Ice Age companions still make room for you by the fire. Another well-known instance is La Chapelle aux Saints, an older male who suffered from severe arthritis, missing teeth, and spinal issues. And again, he was clearly cared for. So not only were Neanderthals sustaining injuries in ways that would deeply alarm modern OSHA inspectors, but they were also actively assisting each other in the healing process. Emotional support and survival, Neanderthals seemingly embraced both. However, the sheer frequency of these injuries also provides insight into their lifestyles. These were not people who cautiously hunted small game from a safe distance or daintily foraged for berries. They engaged directly and intimately with danger. Their primary weapons were largely thrusting spears. Think stab rather than throw. And when you hunt in such a manner, the animal typically retaliates. The next time you happen to trip on a rug and feel a wave of self-pity, remember that Neanderthals spent their lives being tackled by Ice Age death machines, simply shrugged it off with some moss and a fire, and still managed to live long enough to invent personal grooming. Now, that's resilience. Neanderthals didn't just survive the Ice Age, they brought fire to it. This is essentially the prehistoric equivalent of telling winter, "Not today, Satan." Now, they weren't out there dramatically throwing fireballs or inventing s'mores, but they absolutely possessed the knowledge to create, maintain, and even strategically utilize fire in ways that would have earned a nod of approval from a caveman version of Bear Grylls. How do we know this? Archaeological sites clearly reveal compelling evidence of hearths, centralized fire pits containing charred bones, heated stones, and layers of ash, sometimes accumulated over years in the very same location. That's not merely a random wildfire. That's a Neanderthal thoughtfully selecting a suitable spot, building a fire, and then leisurely cooking dinner beside it, probably while glaring at the wind. The prevailing theory suggests they employed methods such as striking flint against pyrite, generating a spark that could ignite dry grass or moss. No matches, no lighters, no YouTube tutorials, just raw determination and a suspicious pile of rocks. It was the Ice Age equivalent of saying, "Hold my beer." They didn't solely use fire for warmth either. Fire aided them in cooking food, which made it considerably easier to chew and digest. This was not just a culinary improvement. It also unlocked more nutrients, reduced parasites, and quite possibly afforded them more leisure time to invent other helpful things, like gossip. Then there's the significant advantage of tool making. Heating flint can make it considerably easier to nap or shape into tools. So it's quite plausible that Neanderthals were practicing thermal engineering long before humans even conceived of creating pointless committees. And let's not overlook the crucial aspect of defense. Fire naturally deters predators. Gathering around a fire provided not only warmth and light, but also a makeshift force field against anything that might growl menacingly in the dark. Picture a group of Neanderthals roasting meat, sharing stories, and casting imposing shadows on the cave walls. Fire was, in essence, their home security system. Were they the absolute first to discover fire? Probably not. But they undeniably mastered it in their own steady, practical, and impressively calm manner. They didn't flaunt it. They simply and quietly transformed cold caves into habitable homes and raw meat into slightly more tender meat. Neanderthals didn't possess multi-tools, screwdrivers, or instructional YouTube videos. But give them a chunk of flint and a moment of quiet contemplation, and they would skillfully craft a toolkit capable of skinning a deer, constructing a shelter, and quite possibly opening a medieval wine bottle. Their tools weren't just sharp rocks. They were meticulously crafted instruments, made with remarkable attention to detail, clear purpose, and just the right amount of controlled force. The primary technique they employed was the Levallois method. This was a complex, multi-step process involving the careful preparation of a stone core in such a way that precisely shaped flakes could be removed in a predictable manner. In simpler terms, they weren't merely haphazardly banging rocks together like toddlers. They were actively planning ahead, meticulously shaping cores, analyzing angles, and executing cuts with such finesse that modern archaeologists sometimes mistakenly attribute their work to early Homo sapiens craftsmanship, which frankly must be quite irritating for them. Among the impressive Neanderthal tool repertoire were scrapers, points, awls, borers, and even hafted tools, blades meticulously attached to wooden shafts using tree resin and sinew. This isn't just about making something sharp, that's prehistoric composite engineering, which is a rather sophisticated way of describing duct tape, but significantly more challenging to invent. They utilize these tools for virtually everything: butchering meat, tanning hides, woodworking, and probably the occasional expression of frustration. And let's be honest, anyone who could figure out how to bond stone to a stick using tree glue and immense patience truly deserves a TED Talk. Their toolkits also varied by region. This indicates that Neanderthals weren't just simply replicating one another's techniques. They were actively innovating, adapting their methods to suit local resources, diverse climates, and available prey. One group might skillfully utilize limestone, while another preferred flint. Some even appear to have experimented with bone and antler tools. It's almost like a prehistoric Etsy, and they were certainly not afraid of continuous improvement. Over time, their tools became more refined, more efficient, and arguably more lethal. This wasn't merely evolution at work. this was the result of intellect and diligent practice. When most people envision Neanderthals, they tend to picture grunting figures hunched around a fire, a club in one hand, and their dinner still twitching in the other. But the archaeological record reveals a distinctly different narrative. One where the very same people who could efficiently dismember a reindeer in 5 minutes also paused to meticulously decorate a shell or tenderly bury a loved one with flowers. Yes, Neanderthals possessed culture, and not just the kind that grows on old meat. Let's begin with burials. Numerous Neanderthal sites show clear evidence of intentional graves, often dug in shallow pits. Sometimes these graves contain grave goods or traces of pollen, strongly suggesting that flowers may have been placed with the deceased. Whether this practice was spiritual, symbolic, or merely a prehistoric version of "he liked plants," we may never definitively know. But the crucial point is that they cared. They mourned. They didn't simply discard grandma behind a boulder and consider it done. And then there's the matter of art. For many years, it was widely assumed that Neanderthals did not engage in artistic expression. That was believed to be our unique domain. Then, astonishingly, we discovered cave paintings in Spain, crafted with red ochre, dating back over 64,000 years ago. Spoiler alert, that's before modern humans even arrived in Europe. That uncomfortable silence you might hear right now is the sound of anthropology professors reevaluating everything they once confidently asserted. Neanderthals also collected decorative objects. These included pierced shells, feathers, and eagle talons, items that served no obvious practical function, unless they were secretly inventing cosplay. Some of these may have been used as ornaments, ritual objects, or even social signals. Either way, their lives weren't solely about survival. They were also about meaning. There's even a mysterious cave structure discovered in France, deep underground, constructed from broken stalagmites meticulously arranged into rings. No sunlight, no apparent practical use, no graffiti, just Neanderthals 176,000 years ago, building in the dark as if they were summoning something, or perhaps just being uniquely peculiar. Who truly knows? And we absolutely cannot overlook the aspect of language. They possessed the hyoid bone, which is crucial for speech production, and genes directly related to language processing. So, while they may not have written epic poetry, it's quite safe to conclude that they weren't merely grunting. Somewhere, a Neanderthal once looked at another and articulated something meaningful, probably concerning meat, but meaningful nonetheless. Now let's discuss what you're likely most curious about. Yes, Neanderthals and modern humans did in fact interact romantically, quite biblically and demonstrably through DNA evidence. When early Homo sapiens began migrating into Europe and Asia around 60,000 years ago, they encountered the existing inhabitants, the Neanderthals. And rather than treating them like distant cousins at a particularly awkward wedding, they engaged in the evolutionary equivalent of asking, "You up?" with absolutely no sense of irony. We know this intermingling occurred because it is quite literally inscribed in our genes. Most individuals of non-African descent today carry approximately 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This strongly suggests that somewhere in your ancestral lineage, one of your very distant great-grandparents experienced an Ice Age date night that, shall we say, got a bit out of hand. Was it genuine affection? A strategic move for survival? A prehistoric version of, well, the gene pool isn't that vast? Scientists are still actively debating these possibilities. Some encounters were likely consensual, while others perhaps less so. It's challenging to determine precisely what prehistoric romance truly looked like, but we do know it left indelible genetic fingerprints that continue to linger, influencing traits such as immune system responses, skin tone, and quite possibly your innate tendency to dislike cilantro. It's also quite interesting to note that this was not merely a one-time anomaly. Genetic evidence clearly indicates that interbreeding took place multiple times, in various locations over thousands of years. So evidently it wasn't just one rather confused Homo sapiens at a very dimly lit cave party. And the genetic flow wasn't entirely unidirectional. Neanderthal males and Homo sapiens females seem to intermix more frequently, possibly due to the sheer charisma of early human travel stories, and perhaps slightly more refined cheekbones. though we'll never definitively know if the Neanderthals were more impressed by conversational skills or the ability to start a fire. What we do know is that this genetic mixing didn't result in a completely blended superspecies. The Neanderthals eventually disappeared, but significant parts of them continue to live on within us. Your slightly wider nose, for instance, could very well be a Neanderthal gift. Your fondness for red meat and your general aversion to cardio are also, shall we say, suspicious. So, before you find yourself chuckling at Neanderthals for their prominent brow ridges or their questionable fashion choices, you might want to consider checking your own ancestry report. Because, statistically speaking, you might just be part Neanderthal. No offense, of course, it's simply a matter of science. Thanks to advanced genome sequencing and the tireless efforts of geneticists armed with high-powered microscopes and ample coffee, we now understand that most individuals of non-African descent carry approximately 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This means if you're currently watching this, and one of your very distant great-grandparents habitually wore fur and remained unfazed during snowstorms, then congratulations, you are in fact a little bit Ice Age. And this ancient genetic inheritance isn't just a quirky historical footnote, it manifests in tangible ways. For instance, Neanderthal genes have been linked to traits involving skin tone, hair texture, immune response, and even pain sensitivity. So, if you happen to sunburn easily, react unusually to allergens, or stub your toe and feel as though you've been shot, you may just have the Neanderthal edition of human firmware installed. There's even evidence suggesting that Neanderthal DNA influences how people sleep, process fats, and respond to certain medications. Some studies further suggest it may even play a role in mood regulation, meaning, yes, your brooding tendencies and general grumpiness during winter might actually be genetically justifiable. However, it's not exclusively good news. Some Neanderthal gene variants have also been associated with conditions such as type 2 diabetes, depression, and nicotine addiction. So, while your ancient cousins might have helped you survive a woolly mammoth ambush, they could also be partially responsible for your impulse to buy snacks and endlessly scroll through social media at 2 a.m. It's also worth noting that African populations whose ancestors did not interbreed with Neanderthals after migrating out of Africa possess little to no Neanderthal DNA. However, they do carry traces of other archaic humans, such as the Denisovans, which illustrates that the human family tree is less of a neat, clean chart and more of a tangled, romantically chaotic shrub. Neanderthals successfully thrived for nearly 300,000 years, enduring numerous ice ages, formidable saber-toothed predators, and even each other. They were, in essence, the original Europeans, the true indigenous inhabitants. And then, approximately 40,000 years ago, they quietly vanished. There was no dramatic extinction event, no catastrophic comet impact. They simply faded into the background, as if they somehow missed the memo about continuing to exist into the Holocene epoch. So, what exactly happened? One prevailing theory points to climate change. As the last ice age began to shift, Neanderthals struggled to adapt to the evolving environments. Their traditional hunting grounds underwent changes, large game animals became scarcer, and even mammoths started to become, shall we say, dramatic. For a group specifically built to dominate cold climates, warming weather was less about pleasant summer vibes and more about an existential crisis. Another theory centers on competition with Homo sapiens. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they brought with them innovations such as long-distance weapons, more diverse diets, and that incredibly annoying habit of successfully surviving virtually everywhere they went. They also reproduced more quickly, traveled more extensively, and possibly communicated more effectively, which in a species-level competition counts for a great deal. It's also highly probable that Neanderthals were simply outnumbered. Their populations were smaller and more isolated, leading to less genetic diversity. A serious vulnerability when every winter feels like a survival game show, and your neighbors are reproducing as if it's a competitive sport. And yet, this wasn't a violent takeover. There's no substantial evidence of widespread genocide or large-scale battles. If anything, Neanderthals and humans coexisted for thousands of years, exchanged DNA, shared ideas, and likely engaged in some rather awkward campfire conversations. Slowly over time, they blended until there were no longer any pure Neanderthal populations remaining. The last known Neanderthals likely inhabited southern Iberia in places like Gibraltar, where they persisted for a few thousand years longer, like the final flickering flames of a candle. The archaeological record then becomes quiet. No new tools, no new burials, just stillness. But this wasn't a failure. It was simply a completed chapter, and one that left a permanent, indelible mark. Neanderthals didn't disappear with a bang, but their influence continues to live on, not in grand monuments or ancient scrolls, but within our DNA, our bones, and our very blood. They weren't eradicated, they were absorbed. For the majority of modern history, Neanderthals were unfortunately given the short end of the evolutionary stick, not in terms of their biology, but rather in their public image. They were the original victims of profoundly negative press. When the first Neanderthal fossils were unearthed in the mid-1800s, scientists were somewhat perplexed by what they found. The skull appeared human-like, but the brow ridges were exceptionally large, and the limbs seemed unusually thick, as if someone had taken a typical person and run them through a bulk filter. Victorian scientists, swiftly labeled them as brutish, primitive, and likely rather terrible at dinner conversation. Thus began the enduring myth of the stooped, grunting caveman, part monstrous creature, part embarrassing, distant uncle. And the very name, Neanderthal, didn't help. It sounded harsh, like something that might reside under a bridge and hurl stones at passing goats. Early reconstructions of Neanderthals also did them no favors. One particularly famous depiction showed a Neanderthal standing almost gorilla-like, with a vacant, 1,000-yard stare and virtually no neck, which, as a quick spoiler, was actually based on an elderly individual suffering from severe arthritis. That would be akin to judging all humans based on someone's great-grandpa during a particularly bad back spasm. The inaccurate image, unfortunately, stuck. Cartoons, movies, and even textbooks relentlessly reinforced the stereotype, a simple-minded brute with a club and questionable posture. Meanwhile, the truth that Neanderthals buried their dead, created art, crafted intricate tools, and quite possibly adorned themselves with jewelry, was quietly overlooked in favor of grunts and loincloths. Why did we engage in this misrepresentation? Likely because it allowed us to feel a sense of superiority. Humans, after all, love a compelling narrative about how we were the chosen ones, the intelligent ones, the only ones. Reducing Neanderthals to failed prototypes allowed us to maintain that comforting narrative intact. It also conveniently helped to explain away any uncomfortable genetic overlap between our species. Sure, we're related, but we're clearly better, right? Only very recently has this pervasive myth begun to truly unravel. As more and more archaeological discoveries emerge, we are compelled to acknowledge that Neanderthals were, in fact, far more like us than not. They were not evolutionary mistakes. They represented a parallel success story. Different strategies, yet the same fundamental struggles. Music fades out. New, perhaps slightly more dramatic, but still calm music begins. In the war-torn twilight of Japan's Heian period, the battlefield was unequivocally no place for a woman. And yet, that is precisely where Tomoe Gozen belonged. Imagine a vast sea of armored men, their steel clashing amidst the dust and chaos of war. And among them, one solitary figure conspicuously stands out. Not because she was out of place, but because she was demonstrably more skilled, more fearless, and more precise than most of the seasoned warriors surrounding her. Tomoe Gozen was not merely some camp follower or a noble lady playfully dabbling in warfare. She was a highly trained warrior, a Onnamusha, hailing from the province of Echigo. From a very young age, she was rigorously taught to ride, to expertly shoot a bow from horseback, and to wield a katana with such incredible ferocity that she left men twice her size bleeding in the dirt. Her unwavering loyalty lay with Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a prominent general of the Minamoto clan. But let there be no mistake, Tomoe was not simply his bodyguard or a decorative ornament. She was his commander, his undisputed equal, his formidable enforcer. Contemporary accounts describe her as a remarkably beautiful woman, possessing fair skin, long hair, and charming features. Yet the compliments extended far beyond her mere looks. They spoke of her immense strength, her uncanny proficiency in archery, and her unmatched swordsmanship. And this wasn't merely flowery poetry or courtly gossip, it was documented battlefield fact. She was capable of breaking through enemy ranks, decapitating a foe mid-gallop, and continuing her ride without so much as a misstep. Tomoe Gozen was, quite simply, a force of nature in human form. And the timing of her emergence was no mere coincidence. Japan was being torn apart by the Genpei War, a brutal civil conflict between the Minamoto and Taira clans vying for control of the imperial throne. Feudal codes were rapidly being rewritten, the samurai class was steadily rising, and within this vacuum of both order and chaos, Tomoe Gozen meticulously carved out a space no woman had ever dared to claim before, on the very front lines of battle. She didn't just fight, she commanded troops, she secured victories, she carried severed heads back to camp like any warrior, proving her kill. And most importantly of all, she defiantly challenged the carefully established boundaries of what womanhood was supposedly meant to look like in 12th century Japan. Tomoe Gozen was not an exception. She was a revelation, a powerful warning, and a burgeoning legend in the making. Before Tomoe Gozen ever experienced the realities of battle, she first had to master the art of survival in a world fundamentally structured to exclude her. Feudal Japan was deeply entrenched in strict hierarchies, rigid codes of honor, and clearly defined boundaries, particularly concerning women. Daughters of samurai were generally expected to be polite, loyal, and quiet. However, Tomoe's early life was anything but conventional. We don't possess her exact birth date, but it's likely she was born into a minor samurai family during the late Heian period. Some accounts suggest she may have been raised within the household of Minamoto no Yoshinaka himself. Whether she was his concubine, foster sister, or trusted retainer remains a subject of debate. But what is undeniably clear is her exceptional skill, which certainly didn't appear by accident. It was painstakingly earned. While young boys were traditionally handed swords and rigorously drilled in the Bushido code, Tomoe would have had to prove repeatedly that she could perform everything they could and do it even better. Her training would have been utterly brutal. Swordsmanship wasn't simply about raw strength. It demanded impeccable timing, precise control, and an astute ability to anticipate your opponent's moves. She would have trained extensively in kenjutsu for blade work and kyudo for archery, all while simultaneously learning to fight effectively in heavy armor and expertly manage a warhorse at full gallop. During the rare periods of peace, she likely honed her skills with the naginata, a curved blade polearm traditionally associated with female warriors. But let there be no mistake, this was not some symbolic ceremonial practice. This was intensive preparation for genuine, brutal violence. Tomoe's fighting style masterfully combined both elegance and lethal effectiveness, and she didn't just keep pace with the men, she often surpassed them. This early phase of her life, preceding the battles and the legends, was largely marked by isolation. Most women did not carry swords, most women did not participate in strategic meetings, and most women were certainly not expected to survive long on the battlefield. But Tomoe compelled the world to conform to her extraordinary abilities. Every skill she acquired had to be twice as sharp, twice as precise, and twice as deadly as those of her male counterparts. Because if she were to fail, no one would attribute it to a soldier's mistake. They would unequivocally label it a woman's weakness. And so, before Tomoe Gozen could ever etch her name into the annals of history, she first had to carve her own unique place into the highly stratified samurai world, blade by blade, day by day, in quiet determination and shadow, not by invitation, but by sheer, unyielding will. By the time Tomoe Gozen reached adulthood, Japan teetered on the brink of collapse. The Genpei War, a bitter civil conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans, erupted in 1180. It wasn't merely a clash of armies, it was a complete and fundamental reshaping of the country's entire power structure. Emperors were being manipulated like chess pieces, and the warrior class was poised to seize control of history itself. And Tomoe? She was right in the thick of it all. Her lord, and possibly her lover, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, was a distant cousin to the more renowned Minamoto no Yoritomo. But unlike Yoritomo, Yoshinaka was not content with remaining in the shadows. He yearned for control over Kyoto, over the Minamoto clan, over the entire nation. And when war broke out, he did not hesitate. he raised his own formidable army in the northern provinces and commenced his campaign southward, with Tomoe Gozen steadfastly by his side. She was not merely a symbolic warrior to display at court. Tomoe led troops directly into battle. She made critical strategic decisions, and when the fighting escalated into a bloody maelstrom, she was on the front lines, her blade drawn, issuing commands that most men wouldn't dare to question. She served as a powerful symbol of Yoshinaka's audacity, his willingness to defy tradition, and his fierce determination to win by any means necessary. The Genpei War was a savage and relentless affair. Battles were fought across rivers, deep within forests, and through treacherous mountains. Arrows rained down like monsoon storms, and hand-to-hand combat left the earth drenched in blood. One of Tomoe's most celebrated victories occurred during the Battle of Yokotagawara, where she reportedly led a charge that utterly decimated enemy forces. Chronicles claim she personally beheaded several samurai and presented their heads as trophies. This wasn't for vanity, it was for undeniable proof. Every kill served as a receipt, every severed head a chilling message. But war wasn't solely about glory, it was also about loyalty and, tragically, betrayal. As Yoshinaka steadily gained power, tensions inevitably escalated with Yoritomo, who perceived his cousin's growing ambition as a direct threat. The Minamoto clan, already fractured by pride and individual egos, began to turn inward. While the Taira remained the ostensible enemy, Yoshinaka now found himself needing to watch his own back. Tomoe, ever loyal, remained closely by his side. But even the mightiest sword could not cut through the intricate web of politics. And as the war intensified, so did the pressure, not just on Yoshinaka's claim to power, but on Tomoe's unique place in history itself. As the Genpei War relentlessly dragged on, Yoshinaka's ambition ultimately outpaced his ability to maintain alliances. In 1183, following a series of brilliant military victories, he achieved what many had considered impossible. He successfully drove the Taira clan out of Kyoto and seized control of the imperial court. At that precise moment, he was undeniably the most powerful man in all of Japan. And standing faithfully beside him, as always, was Tomoe Gozen, victorious, loyal, and bearing the stains of battle. But power, as is often the case, is a double-edged blade. Yoshinaka had initially dreamed of restoring imperial authority, but the emperor and court nobles swiftly realized that he was as unpredictable and uncontrollable as the war he had fought. He plundered the city, alienated Kyoto's elite, and began making moves that alarmed even his fellow Minamoto clan members. Most damning of all, he attempted to take direct control of Emperor Go Shirakawa, a symbolic act of supreme authority that would ultimately seal his political doom. Minamoto no Yoritomo, now the de facto leader of the Minamoto faction, responded with swift and decisive condemnation. He declared Yoshinaka a traitor and dispatched two highly loyal generals, Minamoto Noriyori and the renowned Minamoto no Yoshitsune, to eliminate him. The Minamoto Civil War had begun, and Tomoe Gozen was now fighting not against the Taira, but against her own clan. What ensued was a rapid, tragic descent. Yoshinaka, once the bold and reckless upstart, found himself outmaneuvered and severely outnumbered. He retreated from Kyoto with only a handful of loyal retainers, including Tomoe. They made their final desperate stand at the Battle of Owazu in early 1184. It would be a last gasp, not for the glory of victory, but for the unwavering demands of honor. As the enemy forces relentlessly closed in, Tomoe fought with the ferocity of a demon unleashed. Chronicles relate that she bravely charged into the enemy lines, sought out the strongest warrior she could find, and promptly decapitated him before riding back through the chaotic carnage. This was not merely about demonstrating her skill. It was a powerful, defiant message. Even in defeat, she would not be erased. But Yoshinaka knew their cause was lost. Legend recounts that he requested Tomoe to leave the battlefield, not because he doubted her immense bravery, but because dying alongside a woman would be considered shameful for a samurai general. It was a cruel irony. The fiercest warrior faithfully at his side was being dismissed solely to protect his legacy. Did she obey? Some historical sources say yes. Others suggest she simply vanished into the thick of battle and was never seen again. Either way, the fall of Yoshinaka marked the end of an era and the dramatic beginning of a legend. Snow silently blanketed the battlefield. It was February of 1184, and the plains of Awazu were eerily quiet, perhaps too quiet for the bloody storm that was about to unfold. Minamoto no Yoshinaka stood with only a few dozen men remaining. Once a triumphant conqueror of Kyoto, he was now a fugitive of his own clan. His final stand had arrived. And Tomoe Gozen, ever faithfully by his side, was not about to let him face death alone. The odds were utterly hopeless. Hundreds of enemy warriors, led by the formidable Yoshitsune and Noriyori, bore down upon them. Their armor gleamed, their horses kicked up frozen earth, and amidst the frigid winds, Tomoe Gozen calmly adjusted her helmet, drew her sword, and courageously charged into legend. According to the 14th century Heike Monogatari, Tomoe did not retreat. Instead, she surged forward like a furious whirlwind, actively seeking the strongest opponent she could locate. She found Hatakeyama Shigetada, a warrior renowned in his own right. Whether fueled by fury, desperation, or an unyielding refusal to die quietly, Tomoe did not wait for introductions. She skillfully locked blades with him, unseated him from his horse, and expertly decapitated him in one fluid motion. This was her final, defiant trophy. This wasn't merely showmanship, it was samurai ethos in powerful motion, to die beautifully, to fight to the very last breath, to prove oneself in the face of impossible odds. For Tomoe, this singular act, recounted and reimagined by countless generations, became her enduring battle cry, echoing powerfully across time. Meanwhile, Yoshinaka's horse became tragically mired in a rice paddy, and a volley of arrows brought him down. His loyal companion, Imai Kanehira, committed suicide in dramatic fashion, placing his sword in his mouth and leaping from his horse. The warlord's inner circle had been extinguished. But Tomoe, here the historical records diverge. One version claims Yoshinaka explicitly ordered her to flee before his death, fearing the shame of dying alongside a woman. Other accounts suggest she defiantly refused, fought her way out of the fray, and vanished into the mountains. Still others propose she was captured, forcibly married to an enemy general, and later became a nun. None of these endings have been definitively confirmed. However, one thing remains certain. Her last recorded action was unequivocally not one of surrender. It was one of fierce defiance. Tomoe Gozen did not simply disappear. She ascended into legend, carried forward on the back of one perfect, furious final charge. After the blood-soaked snows of Awazu, Tomoe Gozen inexplicably vanished from the official records, as if she had literally ridden straight off the battlefield and directly into myth. No historian can state with absolute certainty what ultimately became of her, and perhaps, in a fitting twist, that is precisely how it should be. Warriors like Tomoe were not traditionally meant to survive. They were expected to perish alongside their lord, with their sword and with their honor intact. But Tomoe, she may have chosen something far more rebellious, to simply live. The Heike Monogatari, our primary source for Tomoe's life, offers conflicting narratives. One version asserts she was captured and compelled to marry one of Yoritomo's generals, Wada Yoshimori. She bore him a child, and following his death, she reportedly became a nun, retreating from the world of steel and political intrigue. Another tale claims she symbolically cut off her long warrior's hair, assumed a new identity, and vanished into the secluded mountain monasteries of Nagano, never to be seen again. Yet another version hints that she continued to wander the countryside as a ronin, an unaligned warrior hired for private vengeance and skirmishes in borderlands. And then, silence. Centuries of it. The definitive truth, buried somewhere beneath layers of folklore, fragmented scrolls, and oral tales, may never truly surface. But Tomoe's very act of vanishing became an integral part of her enduring power. By slipping out of documented history, she transcended mortality. She was no longer confined by a single ending, a singular role, or a restrictive version of femininity. Instead, she blossomed into a powerful symbol of possibility. What renders her story even more enigmatic is how Japan itself transformed in her absence. The ascent of the shogunate under Minamoto no Yoritomo ushered in the Kamakura period, a rigid, patriarchal era where women were progressively pushed further into the background. Female warriors didn't entirely disappear, but they were increasingly marginalized, romanticized, or outright erased. And yet, Tomoe endured. Perhaps not in the dusty scrolls of official history, but certainly in the stories mothers recounted to their daughters, and in the hushed whispers among soldiers around campfires. She evolved into a phantom that subtly challenged the very ideal of the samurai, the woman who fought like 10 men but answered to no one. Over time, poets, playwrights, and artists resurrected her. Sometimes she appeared as a tragic lover, sometimes as an avenging demon, and sometimes as the last true samurai, but always, unfailingly, as a figure who defied conventional expectations and left behind a captivating trail of mystery. Tomoe Gozen didn't merely vanish, she profoundly transformed, and the silence she left in her wake roars louder than any dramatic death scene. As centuries gently unfolded, the woman once feared on the battlefield underwent a remarkable metamorphosis, becoming something entirely new. A legend carefully sculpted by poets, serene monks, and imaginative playwrights. In an era where women were generally expected to remain unseen, Tomoe Gozen became utterly unforgettable. The Heike Monogatari, a sweeping, semi-historical war epic compiled in the 13th century, was the first to etch her enduring image into cultural memory. However, this text was never solely a history book. It was a performance, a grand piece of theater. Blind monks, known as Biwa Hoshi, traveled from town to town, chanting the compelling stories of the Genpei War to the evocative sound of the biwa lute. Through their resonant voices, Tomoe Gozen was magnificently reborn, not merely as a formidable fighter, but as a poignant, tragic heroine. Later adaptations embellished her even further. In No and Kabuki theater, Tomoe became a recurring and beloved figure. Her beauty was exquisitely exaggerated, her unwavering loyalty dramatically amplified, and her battles meticulously stylized to perfection. She was frequently paired with doomed love stories, heart-wrenching farewells, and profound moral lessons concerning honor and duty. Audiences didn't just passively observe her fighting, they openly wept for her, deeply admired her, and feared her in equal measure. However, this romanticization came with a subtle cost. The true woman, the one who fearlessly decapitated enemies and bravely led cavalry charges, was gradually softened over time. Her practical armor was exchanged for flowing kimonos, and her formidable swordplay became elegant metaphors for feminine resilience. She became, in a way, more palatable, noble, and somewhat tamed. And yet, her powerful image steadfastly refused to fade. Artists throughout the Edo period meticulously painted her, depicting her riding into battle with a serene countenance and poised blade. Samurai guides included her in lists of martial paragons, and sword schools invoked her name. Even as her story became increasingly mythologized, it still retained the sharp, undeniable edge of the battlefield. In modern Japan, Tomoe Gozen is frequently mentioned in the same breath as other legendary warriors like Musashi, Benkei, and Yoshitsune. But unlike them, she carries the unique and significant weight of gender defiance. She wasn't just an exception to the rule, she was a profound challenge to it. In every era since, women have looked to Tomoe as undeniable proof that their place is wherever they choose to stand, even if that place is the very heart of the battlefield. The further she drifted from historical fact, the closer she became to a powerful symbol, a woman who shouldn't have existed, yet undeniably did, a warrior who couldn't be contained, yet profoundly endured, and a story that steadfastly refused to end. Tomoe Gozen's blade may have been sheathed over 800 years ago, but her powerful presence continues to linger, etched not only in legend, but deep within the cultural psyche of Japan and beyond. As generations passed, she transcended her role as merely a figure from the Genpei War. She became a potent symbol of resistance, individuality, and the disruptive power of a woman who adamantly refuses to follow a predetermined script. During the Edo period, when samurai culture was formalized and ritualized into an incredibly strict code of conduct, Tomoe's image was utilized as both inspiration and a cautionary tale. Some viewed her as a magnificent embodiment of ideal loyalty, a warrior who served her lord to the bitter end. Others, particularly within patriarchal scholarly circles, saw her as a dangerous anomaly, living proof that chaos ensues when women venture beyond their prescribed roles. But even those who feared her could not erase her enduring presence. By the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, when Japan sought to modernize and redefine its national identity, Tomoe powerfully re-emerged in textbooks and public discourse. This time, she was portrayed as a patriotic heroine. She appeared in children's books, school plays, and nationalistic art, often alongside male samurai legends. While the portrayal was somewhat sanitized, the undeniable fact remained. A female warrior had successfully made it into the historical canon. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Tomoe's legacy continued to evolve. She became a favored subject for manga artists, video game developers, feminist scholars, and filmmakers. In a media landscape often filled with predictable characters, Tomoe stood out distinctly. A woman whose legend wasn't founded on romance, but on fierce combat. She wasn't simply the lover left behind. She was the one who bravely picked up the sword and fought forward. Modern portrayals of Tomoe reflect shifting societal attitudes. Some depict her as a powerful feminist icon, others as a tragic figure of unfulfilled destiny. Some even present her as a warrior spirit, eternally haunting the battlefields. Regardless of the interpretation, she is consistently portrayed as strong, undeniably complex, and always just beyond the full grasp of complete understanding. Even within politics and education, Tomoe Gozen has become shorthand for defiance. Schools are named in her honor, martial arts dojos cite her in their lineage, and she appears on stamps, posters, and even in anime storylines. Her name is invoked whenever someone needs to assert that a warrior's soul can manifest in any form. She may have fought only one specific war, but her enduring presence continues to inspire and rally people across every battle for identity, justice, and one's rightful place. Tomoe Gozen never explicitly asked to be remembered. She left behind no memoirs, no personal letters, or poetic reflections. She left behind the only thing that truly mattered to a warrior of her era, a legacy forged in blood, unwavering loyalty, and intense fire. And in doing so, she achieved something few in history ever truly manage: immortality, without ever explicitly seeking it. Unlike many women of her time, Tomoe was not preserved in memory because she conformed to society's ideals. She was preserved precisely because she courageously defied them. Every time she swung her formidable blade on a battlefield swarming with men who considered her unworthy, she fundamentally rewrote the established rules of feudal Japan. And although she eventually vanished into obscurity, her absence only amplified the resonance of her story. In a culture where silence often defined a woman's worth, Tomoe's silence after Awazu has become its own powerful kind of roar. The absence of concrete facts surrounding her ultimate fate has granted generations of artists, scholars, and revolutionaries the implicit permission to fill that void with their own meaning. She has become the embodiment of possibility, tangible proof that one can defy established structures and still achieve legendary status. Her name continues to live on, not only in literature and popular culture, but in the indomitable spirit of every woman who refuses to be invisible, every athlete who pushes beyond her perceived limits, every leader who is told she is too bold, and every fighter who doesn't wait for permission to stand her ground. Tomoe Gozen is not merely a historical figure. She is a powerful standard-bearer of defiance, enveloped in an eloquent silence. Today, statues honoring her stand proudly in Nagano and across Japan. Schoolgirls meticulously study her in history classes. Cosplayers meticulously embody her at anime conventions. Martial artists whisper her name with reverence as they train with the naginata. She even makes appearances in international games and series, consistently reminding global audiences that the archetype of the female warrior is not mere fiction, it is indeed history. And yet, her greatest power may reside in the very fact that we still don't fully comprehend her. Was she a concubine who transformed into a general? A foster daughter rigorously trained in the art of war? A lone ronin who walked into the mountains and never looked back? We may never fully uncover the complete truth, but perhaps that is precisely the point. Tomoe Gozen was never meant to be confined to a single story. She was destined to be many, not bound by records, nor erased by the passage of time. Simply, eternally riding, sword drawn, into the legend she forged for herself. Music fades out completely. New soft ambient begins. Long before satellites illuminated our night skies and compasses reliably pointed north, ancient mariners gazed out over seemingly endless horizons and posed the most audacious question of all: what lies beyond? These were not reckless adventurers. They were ingenious engineers, astute navigators, and profound dreamers. With little more than the guiding stars overhead and the prevailing winds in their sails, they meticulously carved out sea routes, that would eventually become the very first arteries of global connection. Humanity's profound relationship with the sea began tens of thousands of years ago. Some of the earliest known evidence of watercraft dates back over 40,000 years, long before the advent of the agricultural revolution. Even then, early humans were already skillfully utilizing rafts to reach incredibly distant islands like Australia, a journey that necessitated crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean. These were not mere lucky accidents. They were meticulously planned journeys, executed with a clear and sophisticated understanding of tides, winds, and celestial patterns. By 3000 BCE, maritime technology was flourishing. Cultures in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and along the Nile were already regularly employing boats for both trade and fishing. But it wasn't until certain cultures ventured onto the high seas that true oceanic navigation truly began. These early seafarers faced immense challenges. No maps, no written instructions, and often no absolute guarantee that they would ever return. And yet they embarked on these journeys, driven by necessity, innate curiosity, and the fundamental drive for survival. They learned to interpret the waves as if reading an open book. They meticulously observed how clouds formed over distant islands, how birds flew at specific times of day, and how the stars gracefully rotated across the night sky. The night sky, in particular, became their most invaluable tool. Polaris, for instance, in the northern hemisphere, served as a fixed point for reliable orientation. In the southern hemisphere, navigators keenly observed the Southern Cross. These seasoned seafarers learned to discern the subtle push of currents beneath their hulls. They understood the unique sound of the wind in their sails, and most impressively, they meticulously passed this profound knowledge down orally for countless generations, through intricate chants, captivating stories, and deeply sacred traditions. Their tools were not compasses or astrolabes. Their tools were unwavering memory, keen observation, and profound intuition. This was not merely survival. It was science before science even had a name, a sophisticated way of comprehending the world that seamlessly married nature with culture. And as they ventured across unknown waters, these ancient mariners weren't just navigating vast oceans. They were meticulously laying the very foundations for global trade, widespread migration, and the initial connections between civilizations that had never even heard each other's names. Long before the emergence of Athens or the grandeur of Rome, the island of Crete was home to one of the most sophisticated seafaring civilizations the ancient world had ever witnessed, the Minoans. Flourishing from approximately 2000 to 1450 BCE, the Minoans were more than just islanders. They were brilliant maritime architects who skillfully transformed the vast sea into a bustling superhighway of culture, commerce, and influential control. At the very heart of Minoan power lay the city of Knossos, a sprawling palace complex adorned with remarkably vibrant frescoes depicting dolphins, ships, and a rich array of sea life. These weren't merely decorative flourishes, they were clear declarations of Minoan identity. The Minoans lived and breathed the sea. Their economy thrived on extensive maritime trade, and their influence extended across the Aegean, reaching as far as Egypt, the Levant, and even beyond. Unlike later Greek navies, which were primarily built for warfare, Minoan ships were specifically designed for speed and stability, making them ideal for both trade and diplomatic missions. Their vessels, often beautifully decorated with bird or bull motifs, utilized square sails and rowers to navigate the often calm, yet at times unpredictable, Mediterranean waters. These ships transported a wide array of goods, from precious olive oil and fine wine to intricate pottery and valuable bronze. But more than just goods, the Minoans carried ideas, art, religious practices, and advanced technologies, dispersing them like gentle waves across the vast Aegean Sea. And how did they navigate? While no surviving Minoan navigational charts exist, archaeologists generally believe they relied on a sophisticated combination of star-based navigation and identifiable visual markers. These included coastal headlands, the subtle color variations of the water, and the flight paths of seabirds. Their consistent, successful returns from long voyages strongly indicate a deep and intuitive understanding of seasonal winds and maritime rhythms, long before anyone bothered to write them down. One of the most remarkable indicators of Minoan maritime prowess is their significant role in the development of the Greek alphabet. By actively interacting with Near Eastern cultures like the Phoenicians, the Minoans helped to pave the way for one of history's most influential writing systems. Their ships were not merely vessels for goods, they were truly floating conduits of cultural exchange. But like many sea-based powers, their ultimate demise may have originated from the very ocean they so masterfully navigated. Around 1450 BCE, a powerful volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, may have triggered catastrophic tsunamis and massive ash clouds that devastated Minoan ports and severely destabilized their control. Whether due to natural disaster or subsequent invasion, their ships eventually vanished from the waves. Still, the Minoans left behind far more than mere ruins. They bequeathed a lasting legacy of what it truly meant to rule, not by land, but by the magnificent sea. If the Minoans were the artists of the sea, then the Phoenicians were its tireless entrepreneurs. From approximately 1500 BCE to 300 BCE, the Phoenicians, a loose confederation of independent city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, dominated the eastern Mediterranean, not with vast armies, but with formidable fleets. Their enduring legacy isn't one of sprawling empires and military conquests. It is one of groundbreaking navigation, extensive trade, and the widespread diffusion of culture across the entire known world. The Phoenicians did not possess a unified kingdom or a grand capital city. What they did possess were ships, and an abundance of them. These were sleek, fast, and incredibly maneuverable vessels, capable of undertaking long-distance trade routes, utilizing both efficient square sails and multiple banks of oars. Their ships could skillfully hug coastlines or swiftly dart across open water. And with them they transported valuable goods like glass, cedarwood, and their famous purple dye. But most importantly, they spread transformative ideas. They served as the indispensable middlemen of the ancient world, linking Egypt with Anatolia, Greece with Mesopotamia, and North Africa with the Western Mediterranean. They established numerous outposts and colonies across the coastlines, most famously Carthage in North Africa, which would later rise to formidable prominence and rival Rome itself. Each colony functioned as a crucial node in a vast maritime network, with the mother cities back in the east reaping the immense benefits of trans-Mediterranean commerce. But how did they manage to sail such vast distances without a compass or a sextant? Like their Minoan predecessors, the Phoenicians meticulously used the stars, particularly Polaris, the North Star, as their reliable guide. They also possessed a profound understanding of prevailing wind patterns, distinctive coastal features, and complex current behaviors. Many scholars credit them with developing one of the earliest systematic methods of celestial navigation in the Western world. Yet their greatest contribution wasn't something they physically transported. It was something they ingeniously invented: the alphabet. The Phoenician writing system, developed around 1050 BCE, represented a revolutionary leap forward. It was an alphabet consisting of just 22 characters, each representing a distinct sound rather than entire words or syllables. This groundbreaking script would go on to inspire the Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic alphabets, profoundly impacting literacy across vast regions. Through this linguistic breakthrough and their unwavering seafaring tenacity, the Phoenicians didn't just engage in trade, they fundamentally connected distant peoples. They transformed the sea from a perceived barrier into a vibrant bridge, linking diverse cultures, languages, and economies. And they accomplished this not by forceful colonization of hearts and minds, but by skillfully sailing from one place to the next. The Mediterranean wasn't just their highway, it was their very identity. While the Mediterranean world buzzed with the activity of Phoenician traders and Greek triremes, an entirely different and equally remarkable maritime saga was unfolding on the opposite side of the planet. This was a story of ingenious outriggers, resilient double-hulled canoes, and stars meticulously charted across the largest ocean on Earth. These were the Austronesian seafarers, and they didn't merely sail the seas, they successfully colonized half of the planet's surface without the aid of metal tools, detailed maps, or written language. Originating from what is now Taiwan around 3000 BCE, the Austronesians steadily expanded southward and eastward, skillfully hopping from island to island with astonishing speed. By 1500 BCE, they had reached the Philippines, Indonesia, and the edges of New Guinea. By 1000 BCE, they were established in Micronesia and Melanesia. And by the 1st century CE, they had reached as far as Madagascar to the west and Easter Island to the east. An incredible arc of human migration that spans over 10,000 miles. Their vessels were true marvels of engineering. Austronesians initially developed outrigger canoes for enhanced stability, and later, impressive double-hulled voyaging canoes. These larger vessels were capable of transporting entire families, livestock, and substantial cargo across thousands of miles of open ocean. They expertly harnessed wind power through distinctive crab claw sails and used paddles for precise maneuverability near islands. But what truly distinguished them was their unparalleled skill in navigation. They meticulously utilized the sun, moon, planets, and more than 200 stars as their primary guides. But that is truly just the beginning of their sophisticated techniques. Austronesian navigators, particularly the renowned Polynesian wayfinders, learned to interpret the ocean like a living, breathing map. They could detect subtle changes in wave patterns caused by distant islands reflecting swells. They meticulously followed seabird flight paths, studied precise cloud formations, and even tasted seawater for subtle salinity shifts that indicated the proximity of land. This wasn't merely instinct. It was a highly refined scientific practice, meticulously passed down orally through chance and clever memory devices. Their widespread migration was not random exploration. It was intentional and remarkably repeatable. Lapita pottery, a distinctive cultural artifact, marks their consistent path across the Pacific, clearly demonstrating how interconnected their world truly was. They weren't just island hoppers, they were profound civilization builders, disseminating agriculture, languages, and technology wherever they landed. And in many fundamental ways, they continue to be so today. Modern genetic studies, linguistic analysis, and archaeological discoveries continue to reveal just how remarkably advanced and expansive Austronesian navigation truly was. These ancient mariners didn't just cross oceans. They connected some of the most remote corners of the Earth long before European explorers ever left port. In the Pacific, the sea was never an empty void. It was a clearly understood roadmap. When we typically envision ancient Egypt, towering pyramids and magnificent desert tombs usually come to mind, not necessarily ships. But the Egyptians were far from strangers to water. The mighty Nile River was their lifeline, their primary highway, and their very first school of navigation. Yet, what is often overlooked is how the Egyptians extended their maritime reach far beyond the familiar riverbanks, venturing boldly into the Red Sea and quite possibly even further afield. Egypt's mastery of the Nile began very early, as far back as 3000 BCE. They constructed large wooden boats with planks skillfully lashed together by rope and meticulously sealed with resin. These vessels, propelled by both sails and oars, were absolutely essential for transporting goods, soldiers, and vital grain across the vast stretches of the river. But the Nile was merely the beginning. By the era of Pharaoh Hatshepsut in the 15th century BCE, Egypt was launching impressive sea expeditions from ports along the Red Sea. Her famous voyage to the mysterious land of Punt, possibly located in modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or southern Arabia, was a landmark achievement in ancient maritime history. Reliefs from her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari display remarkably detailed depictions of large cargo ships laden with exotic animals, fragrant incense trees, and precious gold, all triumphantly returning from a successful voyage across the sea. These were not accidental drifts. They were meticulously organized missions, planned with a sophisticated understanding of monsoon wind patterns, currents, and optimal seasonal timing. Egyptian sailors would have meticulously hugged coastlines, utilized star patterns for navigation, and relied on skilled maritime scouts, perhaps even recruiting experienced local sailors from the Red Sea region. Some theories even suggest direct Egyptian contact with the Indus Valley via indirect maritime trade, especially during the peak of Mesopotamian Indus-Egyptian interaction. While direct evidence remains somewhat limited, artifacts such as ivory, lapis lazuli, and spices strongly hint at a broader Indian Ocean trade network in which Egypt may have played a significant role. The ships themselves were engineering marvels for their time. Constructed from imported cedar wood, primarily from Lebanon, Egyptian seafaring vessels featured gracefully curved hulls and large square sails. These ships were designed to carry heavy loads and withstand the significant swells of the Red Sea. Though the Egyptians never ascended to become a dominant naval power like the Phoenicians, they left behind an important and lasting legacy. They were among the very first to treat maritime voyages as royal, sacred, and strategically vital endeavors. Their sea journeys were direct extensions of their empire, their diplomacy, and their perceived divine authority on land. On land, they constructed monumental pyramids, but on water, they bravely launched their boundless ambition. Amidst the dusty plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, once thrived one of the world's oldest urban civilizations, the Harappans, or the Indus Valley Civilization. Flourishing between approximately 2600 and 1900 BCE, they constructed cities with remarkably advanced sanitation systems, standardized bricks, and impressive urban planning. But buried beneath this archaeological brilliance lies another truth, one less frequently discussed, but profoundly significant. The Harappans were prolific maritime traders. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Harappans left behind no deciphered writing, no grand naval reliefs, and no epic tales of extensive sea voyages. Yet, intriguing clues of their maritime prowess quietly punctuate the archaeological record. Excavations at Lothal, a major Harappan port city in Gujarat, revealed what many believe to be one of the world's earliest known dockyards. Measuring 218 meters long, with meticulously engineered floodgates and channels, it connected to an ancient river that flowed directly to the Arabian Sea. This serves as undeniable proof that Harappan engineers were not just thinking inland, but outward, towards distant shores. Artifacts themselves tell the remainder of the story. Harappan seals and goods, including distinctive beads, ivory, and ceramics, have been discovered in Mesopotamia, specifically within the Sumerian cities of Lagash. Akkadian texts refer to a distant land called Meluha, very likely the Indus region, from which boats arrived laden with exotic goods. In return, the Harappans received silver, tin, and lapis lazuli, clearly indicating a complex trade network stretching from the Persian Gulf to the broader Near East. But how did they manage to sail these routes? While no complete Harappan ships survive, miniature models, terracotta boats, and carved depictions suggest the use of both flat-bottomed rivercraft and more robust seagoing vessels. They likely skillfully utilized the same seasonal monsoon winds that would later propel Arabian and Indian traders across the vast Indian Ocean. Harappan mariners probably hugged coastlines, stopping at natural harbors and estuaries, and navigated using celestial cues and prevailing current patterns. Unlike the warrior-focused empires of their time, the Harappans were remarkably peaceful. Their cities show very little evidence of warfare or significant fortifications. This makes their extensive maritime connections even more intriguing. They weren't conquering foreign shores, they were connecting them through peaceful trade and diplomacy. And then, around 1900 BCE, the civilization began its gradual decline. Rivers shifted course, trade dwindled, and cities were gradually abandoned. Their script faded with them, leaving behind a silent and persistent question: just how far did their impressive ships truly sail? Though their voices are now lost to time, the water trails they forged remain etched in harbors, on seals, and in silent, enduring stones. For the ancient Greeks, the sea was not merely a pathway. It was, in many ways, destiny. Cradled by the Aegean, Ionian, and Mediterranean seas, Greek civilization emerged in a world where sailing was as fundamentally essential as farming. From the era of Homeric epics to the very zenith of Athenian naval dominance, the Greeks skillfully transformed maritime culture into a profound art, a precise science, and a crucial strategy. Their earliest stories, those of Odysseus battling fearsome sea monsters and Jason bravely chasing the elusive golden fleece, were not mere myths. They were powerful reflections of a people intimately and inextricably tied to the sea. Greek city-states like Athens, Corinth, and Rhodes all relied heavily on the ocean, not only for vital trade, but also for their very identity. Their gods held dominion over the waves, their heroes embarked on grand sea voyages, and their burgeoning empires metaphorically floated on the wooden hulls of their ships and the vastness of their ambition. By the 8th century BCE, Greek colonists were venturing out across the Mediterranean, founding new cities from Sicily to the distant Black Sea coast. These colonies were not primarily military outposts. They were bustling trade hubs, cultural satellites, and vital ports within an expansive economic web. Goods flowed in both directions: olive oil, wine, and pottery from Greece, and essential grain, metals, and slaves from distant lands. To navigate, Greek sailors relied heavily on coastal sightlines, the guiding stars, especially the rising and setting of specific constellations, and a rich body of oral navigation knowledge passed down through countless generations. Their ships evolved from simple merchant vessels to formidable war machines like the trireme, a sleek, three-tiered galley rowed by up to 170 men and armed with a deadly bronze battering ram. The trireme was more than just a ship. It was a potent, floating expression of Athenian democracy and its burgeoning power. At its peak in the 5th century BCE, Athens boasted the most powerful navy in the ancient world. The Delian League, originally a defensive alliance against Persia, effectively transformed into an Athenian-led maritime empire. Their powerful navy ensured control over vital sea lanes, enforced tributes from allied cities, and facilitated the free flow of resources into Athens, thereby fueling its golden age of philosophy, architecture, and dramatic arts. But with such immense power came inherent vulnerability. The Peloponnesian War against Sparta saw Athens' over-reliance on sea dominance ultimately backfire. Naval defeats, blockades, and internal strife eventually led to its downfall. Still, the legacy endured. Greek maritime innovations in cartography, celestial navigation, and sophisticated shipbuilding laid the essential groundwork for Roman and later European seafaring. And their profound belief that the sea was a grand stage for glory, knowledge, and tragedy continues to echo in Western thought even today. For a people who began primarily as landlocked farmers and shepherds, the Romans were relatively late in truly embracing the sea. But once they didn't merely join the ranks of ancient naval powers, they decisively crushed them. The Mediterranean, once a complex patchwork of rival fleets and scattered colonies, became what the Romans proudly referred to as Mare Nostrum, our sea. Early Rome was by no means a maritime superpower. The Etruscans and Greeks dominated Italy's coasts, while Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers, ruled the western Mediterranean with the most formidable navy in the region. But everything dramatically changed during the Punic Wars. Faced with Carthage's overwhelming naval superiority, the Romans made an incredibly bold move. They reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian warship. In an astonishing display of industrial determination, they constructed an entire fleet, hundreds of ships, in a mere matter of months. But they added something uniquely Roman: the corvus, a boarding bridge that effectively transformed sea battles into land combat. This ingenious innovation played directly to Rome's strength in infantry, allowing their legionaries to storm enemy ships as if they were charging a land fortress. Victory over Carthage in the Punic Wars not only handed Rome naval dominance but also direct control over Sicily, Sardinia, Spain, and eventually the entire Mediterranean coastline. Roman galleys, both military and merchant, patrolled the sea lanes, diligently transporting grain, troops, and exotic goods from Egypt, Gaul, Syria, and beyond. Ports like Ostia and Alexandria bustled with ceaseless activity, transforming the Mediterranean into a vast Roman highway. The Pax Romana, a period of remarkable relative peace lasting 2 centuries, was made possible largely through this unparalleled maritime control. The sea, once a perilous domain of pirate fleets and clashing empires, became a remarkably stabilized zone of commerce. Grain shipments flowed into the capital, and luxury goods like silk, spices, and pearls arrived from India and China via maritime routes stretching to the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. Roman sailors skillfully used a combination of dead reckoning, coastal sailing, and celestial navigation, further aided by detailed maritime itineraries known as periplus. Though lacking modern compasses, they masterfully understood the rhythms of wind and current, especially the reliable Etesian winds that made return voyages in the eastern Mediterranean highly predictable. Rome didn't simply conquer by land, it sustained itself by effectively controlling the sea. Its powerful navy protected trade, enforced imperial will, and ensured seamless communication across vast distances. With their formidable fleets, the Romans accomplished what no other culture had yet managed: they transformed the chaotic sea into a meticulously controlled empire. Long before the advent of modern maps, reliable compasses, and powerful diesel engines, the ancient world was already intricately connected by an invisible network of sea routes. These routes were drawn not with ink, but with the guiding wind, shared memory, and celestial stars. From the simple reed boats of the Nile to the sophisticated double-hulled canoes of the Pacific, these early maritime cultures didn't merely explore the vast seas, they fundamentally defined them. And their enduring legacy continues to linger in every port, every trade route, and every ship that gracefully crosses the waves today. The invaluable knowledge passed down by Minoans, Phoenicians, Austronesians, Egyptians, and countless others became the very bedrock of future navigation. These remarkable cultures discovered how to interpret the sky like a detailed map, how to skillfully sail with the natural rhythms of the earth, and how to construct ships capable of surviving months at sea, all accomplished without metal hulls or written charts. Their profound discoveries were not isolated incidents. They were cumulative. Each seafaring civilization learned from its predecessors or neighboring cultures, contributing a new vital stitch to the rich tapestry of global navigation. Phoenician alphabets, for instance, enabled the precise record-keeping necessary for complex maritime trade. Austronesian navigation traditions, meticulously preserved orally for generations, directly inspired 20th century efforts to revive traditional wayfinding without modern instruments. Greek observations of the stars and winds laid the essential groundwork for ancient geography. Roman engineering bequeathed us ports and lighthouses, structures whose fundamental principles are still echoed in today's harbor designs. Even more significant than the practical tools were the connections forged. Maritime routes allowed ideas to travel much faster than armies. Religions spread by sea, as did technology, new crops, languages, and unfortunately, diseases. The maritime cultures of the ancient world didn't just move physical objects, they profoundly moved entire civilizations. Without their ingenuity, the ancient Silk Roads would have abruptly terminated at the shoreline. Without them, vast empires might never have risen, and distant peoples might have remained strangers to one another forever. And yet, for all their immense accomplishments, so many of these early sailors remain nameless. Their stories were rarely written down, their magnificent ships decayed and vanished. What survives are mere fragments, pottery shards in a sunken cargo hold, a port structure buried beneath modern concrete, or a star map etched on bone or bark. But their impact, that still moves profoundly with the tide. Every container ship crossing the Suez Canal, every satellite-guided cargo run across the Pacific, every naval patrol in the Mediterranean owes something fundamental to those first brave souls who dared to chase the horizon. They may have been ancient, but they were never primitive. They were the original navigators of the human story. Music fades out. New, very gentle and relaxing music begins. In the ancient world, being born into royalty was often perceived as a blessing, yet it was undeniably wrapped in a subtle curse. The instant a child entered a palace, they became far more than just a person. They became a symbol, a valuable political weapon, and the very future of an empire. Their education did not commence in a traditional classroom. It began in the nursery, surrounded by hushed whispers of lineage, profound legacy, and looming threats. Unlike common children who acquired survival skills through practical labor, elite children were meticulously groomed for leadership from their earliest years. Every gesture they made, every word they uttered, was closely watched, carefully corrected, and meticulously crafted. Their lives were, in essence, performances in training, extensive rehearsals for thrones they had not yet earned. They didn't learn to read for leisure. They learned so they could meticulously study treaties. They didn't learn to speak to express personal feelings. They learned to command obedience, recite complex laws, and deliver carefully calculated flattery to foreign envoys. The precise content of their education largely depended on their geographical location and the specific dynastic traditions. However, the overarching goals were universal: the cultivation of control, undeniable charisma, and the assurance of continuity. A Babylonian prince, for example, might be rigorously drilled in cuneiform by scribes, while an Egyptian heir would be introduced to the intricate world of priestly hieroglyphs, sacred rituals, and ancient myths. In Greece, philosophy was deemed essential. In Persia, courtly etiquette was military in its precision. And in China, Confucianism strictly governed the entire curriculum. Even their toys held political significance. Miniature weapons, board games simulating strategic warfare, and symbolic animals all reflected the crucial roles they were expected to master. Tutors were not merely teachers, they were highly skilled handlers, meticulously chosen by the royal court. They were invariably loyal, exceptionally elite, and often quite expendable. If the royal child somehow failed, it was typically the tutor who paid the ultimate price. The stakes were perpetually high. A poorly educated heir was considered a national liability. A soft or inadequately prepared child could easily become a pawn in the intricate games played by enemies or ambitious relatives. Education in this context was not about individual personal development. It was profoundly about the survival of the entire regime. However, for all its inherent strictness, royal education could also be quite dazzling. These privileged children were exposed to advanced astronomy, sophisticated medicine, various foreign languages, complex ethics, and exquisite art long before much of the rest of the world. Some of them matured into remarkable polymaths, skilled statesmen, brilliant generals, and insightful scholars, having been raised not just to rule, but to intellectually surpass every other mind in the room. To be born royal in the ancient world wasn't merely to be born lucky. It was to be born into a lifelong, rigorous test, and education served as the very first battlefield. Behind almost every powerful ruler in the ancient world, there was frequently a far more obscure yet profoundly influential figure, the tutor. These individuals were not simply glorified babysitters. They were often esteemed philosophers, revered priests, seasoned generals, and astute political operatives. Their monumental task was to mold a child not just into a mature adult, but into a capable ruler, a skilled diplomat, and sometimes even a deified figure. Few tutor-student pairings have resonated more powerfully through history than that of Aristotle and Alexander the Great. Chosen by Philip of Macedon, Aristotle was entrusted with the formidable task of transforming the headstrong prince into something far more profound than just a warrior. He meticulously instructed him in ethics, rhetoric, zoology, geography, and philosophy, instilling within him an insatiable hunger for knowledge. When Alexander later conquered much of the known world, he reportedly carried copies of Homer's epics and various philosophical texts with him, treating them like sacred weapons. Aristotle hadn't merely taught him facts, he had meticulously crafted the inner world of a future conqueror. But Aristotle's role was not an isolated exception. In the sprawling Roman Empire, Seneca, the renowned Stoic philosopher and statesman, was assigned to tutor the young Nero. He conscientiously attempted to mold the boy with principles of virtue, logic, and restraint. Unfortunately, as history tragically recounts, Nero ultimately grew into one of Rome's most infamous tyrants. The failure wasn't entirely Seneca's, but it starkly demonstrated how even the most exceptional teachers couldn't always overcome a student's darker inclinations or the pervasive influence of courtly intrigues. In ancient Persia, royal tutors were often formidable military men, selected for their unwavering loyalty and their profound ability to instill strict discipline. Princes of the Achaemenid dynasty were rigorously taught hunting, horseback riding, and combat from the tender age of 7, alongside moral training in truthfulness and justice, all under the vigilant eyes of elite mentors. Their education was intensely practical, Spartan in its rigor, and deeply intertwined with political objectives. In ancient China, Confucian scholars wielded enormous influence over the upbringing of princes. They diligently instilled ideals of filial piety, strict hierarchy, and precise ritual. But woe betide the tutor who taught the wrong thing. A mere slip of the tongue could lead to banishment or even death if a lesson contradicted the emperor's doctrine. Being a royal tutor meant living perpetually in the shadows, subtly shaping history through someone else's voice and actions. They had to be wise yet discreet, commanding yet deferential. They walked a perilous line. Get too close, and they risked envy. Fail, and they were discarded. Succeed, and their names lived on only if their students achieved historical greatness. While the sons and daughters of farmers learned life's lessons from direct experience, Elite children of the ancient world received their education from intricate systems carefully constructed behind palace walls. These included private academies, temple libraries, and in some cases, secret priestly schools that diligently protected knowledge as if it were precious gold. Education for royals wasn't just about preparing for the responsibilities of power. It was profoundly about controlling the very flow of knowledge, the one thing more dangerous than armies in the ancient world. In ancient Egypt, priesthood served as the meticulous gatekeepers of education. Royal children, particularly future pharaohs, were sometimes educated within temple schools, where instruction encompassed the reading of hieroglyphs, memorization of religious texts, understanding ritual practice, and learning advanced astronomy and medicine. These were not skills openly shared with the general public. Literacy was rare, held sacred, and only those destined to govern or interpret the divine were granted such privileged access. Much of this rigorous training was conducted in what we might term secret schools within temples, such as those at Karnak or Heliopolis. Knowledge was meticulously transmitted from priest to pupil in complete confidentiality. The curriculum wasn't solely religious, it was deeply political. Knowing how to recite spells, interpret omens, or plan rituals granted rulers immense control over life and death in the eyes of their people. Persia also maintained its own elite educational structure. The sons of Persian nobility, especially those closely associated with the king, received their education in what Herodotus referred to as the king's school. Kept hidden from public view, these boys were diligently taught truth-telling, writing, archery, and principles of leadership. They also absorbed Zoroastrian ethics and statecraft. This schooling was not exclusively for princes. It was for future satraps, generals, and administrators, men expected to control vast provinces and armies with unwavering loyalty. In India, royal children might attend gurukulas, secluded forest schools run by learned Brahmins. While commoners rarely had access, princes were often placed under the strict guidance of a single guru who taught them everything from Vedic hymns to sophisticated martial skills. The education was holistic, encompassing spiritual, intellectual, and physical development, and crucially, it was deeply hierarchical. Knowledge was carefully tailored to one's caste role and destined purpose. Even in Greece, where education was somewhat more democratized in certain cities, elite children like those in Sparta or Athens received highly specialized training. Spartan royal sons were rigorously placed in the agoge, the state-run military academy. Athenian aristocrats, conversely, hired private tutors to instruct them in logic, strategy, and rhetoric. This was because knowing how to win a war was only half the battle. Knowing how to win an argument could prove even more significant. In all these ancient worlds, knowledge was not merely taught. It was carefully guarded, passed down like a finely crafted sword, intended only for those deemed capable of wielding it. In the ancient world, royal women were seldom expected to lead armies or directly govern states. However, this by no means implied that their education was trivial. In fact, for many dynasties, the instruction of elite daughters was just as carefully calculated and strategically important as that of their brothers. This was because royal women were not merely daughters, they were future queens, influential priestesses, valuable political pawns, and at times, formidable power players in their own right. In Egypt, royal women could wield immense influence. Queens like Hatshepsut and Nefertiti didn't merely stand beside pharaohs, they actively ruled, commissioned the construction of temples, and engaged in crucial diplomatic efforts. This naturally necessitated a comprehensive education. Princesses in Egypt were frequently taught by temple priests in the art of reading hieroglyphs, reciting complex religious texts, managing extensive estates, and performing sacred rituals. Those destined to become gods' wives of Amun were initiated into powerful priestly orders, acquiring knowledge of rites and theology far beyond the reach of commoners. Some even actively participated in governance, possessing knowledge that rivaled their male counterparts. In Persia, royal women were traditionally kept behind palace curtains, but they were certainly not idle. Achaemenid queens were entrusted with managing vast estates, overseeing significant treasuries, and meticulously maintaining crucial courtly alliances. To perform these duties effectively, they were rigorously taught bookkeeping, diplomacy, and intricate political etiquette. Greek historians like Xenophon noted how Persian queens engaged in significant behind-the-scenes governance, indicating a quiet but formidable education in strategic influence. In ancient Greece, the narrative is more varied. In Athens, education for women, even elite ones, was generally minimal and centered on domestic skills: music, weaving, household management, and some basic reading. However, in Sparta, royal women were purposefully raised for strength and resilience. They underwent physical training, honed their rhetoric, and were deeply imbued with Spartan values. A Spartan princess was expected to be able to speak her mind and command her estates while her husband was away waging war. And when Spartan men frequently died young in battle, it was often the women who steadfastly upheld the family legacy. In India and China, noble women's education largely mirrored religious and dynastic priorities. In the Gupta Empire, royal daughters were sometimes schooled in Sanskrit, music, poetry, and philosophy, skills meticulously designed to enhance their allure and social status. In imperial China, empresses and consorts were taught Confucian ethics, elegant calligraphy, and intricate palace protocol. Those destined for significant political roles, like Empress Lu Ji or Wu Zetian, went far beyond these basics, mastering governance, surveillance, and sophisticated statecraft under the guise of refined etiquette. Royal women walked a delicate, often perilous path. They were primarily expected to charm, not to directly rule. But when circumstances dramatically shifted, they often stepped confidently into positions of power, and when they did, their education was not a mere frill. It was their indispensable arsenal. If swords won battles, then articulate speech won empires. In the ancient world, a royal's ability to communicate was not a mere soft skill. It was a potent weapon. Language, rhetoric, and public persuasion were absolutely essential tools for effective rule, delicate diplomacy, and ultimate survival. And so elite children were not merely taught to speak. They were rigorously trained to captivate, subtly manipulate, and powerfully command through their words. Nowhere was this more evident than in ancient Greece, where rhetoric was regarded as the definitive hallmark of a truly civilized leader. Athenian aristocrats learned from esteemed masters like Isocrates and later the Sophists, who taught persuasive speech as both an intricate art and a precise science. Young elites diligently practiced delivering speeches, actively debating in public forums, and mastering logos, pathos, and ethos, the fundamental pillars of classical persuasion. For those destined to govern, a sharp tongue could often prove more useful than a sharp blade. This ideal of persuasive communication gradually permeated other cultures. In Rome, elite boys were rigorously taught oratory from a young age. They memorized Cicero's famous speeches, learned intricate courtroom strategy, and practiced delivering compelling arguments while meticulously maintaining poise and decorum. For imperial heirs, this wasn't just about courtly performance. It was profoundly about survival. A poorly timed phrase could easily ignite scandal, while a brilliantly delivered speech could sway the entire Senate. Even in monarchies where absolute power was ostensibly wielded, words still held immense significance. In Egypt, the pharaoh was perceived as a divine speaker. His proclamations carried both ritual and legal weight. Royal children learned formal language and ceremonial formulas, meticulously reciting them during religious processions and significant state rituals. In Mesopotamia, scribal schools meticulously taught elite children not only how to write, but how to write persuasively, crafting elaborate royal decrees, diplomatic letters, and mythic hymns. In Persia and India, language played a different but equally vital role. Persian princes were trained in multiple tongues: Old Persian for courtly affairs, Aramaic for diplomacy, and sometimes Greek or Median. They learned how to negotiate, offer compliments, and even intimidate with careful tone and precise timing. Indian royal students, particularly under the Maurya and Gupta empires, diligently studied Sanskrit epics and philosophical texts like the Arthashastra, which offered practical lessons in rhetoric, espionage, and shrewd diplomacy. Even in cultures where oral tradition predominated, such as among Celtic and Germanic elites, skillful storytelling and powerful speech-making were fundamental forms of authority. A prince who could not speak well could not effectively lead, because ultimately power wasn't merely taken, it was spoken into existence. For ancient royals, the vast sky was not simply a canvas adorned with stars. It was a precise calendar, a reliable compass, a colossal clock, and sometimes even a divine script. And beneath that expansive sky, numbers held profound importance. Mathematics and astronomy were not optional subjects for royal heirs. They were foundational disciplines that profoundly shaped how a ruler understood the passage of time, the intricacies of taxation, the principles of architecture, the strategies of war, and even the unfolding of fate itself. In Mesopotamia, long before Pythagoras was a recognized name, Babylonian elites were diligently studying base, 60 mathematical systems, accurately predicting eclipses, and meticulously calculating planetary movements with astonishing precision. Royal scribes and priest astronomers often served as tutors to princes, teaching them to interpret cuneiform tablets filled with intricate data on stars, weather patterns, and omens. These complex calculations were not abstract exercises. They had tangible consequences for determining when to wage war, when to plant crops, or when to perform crucial royal rituals. Egyptian royal education also seamlessly wove mathematics into nearly every sphere of power. Pharaohs needed to grasp land measurement for effective taxation following the annual Nile floods. They also had to meticulously oversee monumental building projects, temples, tombs, and pyramids, which demanded sophisticated geometric knowledge and precise logistical skill. Astronomy guided Egypt's complex religious calendar, and royal children were taught to meticulously track the heliacal rising of Sirius, which heralded the annual inundation of the Nile and marked the precise start of the new year. In ancient India, members of the royal class were exposed to the deep mathematical traditions found in texts like the Sulba Sutras and later Aryabhata's groundbreaking work on algebra and planetary motion. Astronomy was considered both a rigorous scientific discipline and a profound spiritual pursuit, essential for aligning religious rituals and interpreting omens. A wise king consulted the stars, but an educated one possessed the ability to interpret them himself. The Greeks refined these teachings, making them more systematic and philosophical. A Macedonian prince like Alexander would meticulously study arithmetic and astronomy alongside ethics and logic. Greek royal education, deeply influenced by thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, treated mathematics as a direct gateway to understanding the inherent order of the cosmos, and by extension, one's own destined place as a ruler within that cosmic order. Even the Chinese imperial courts relied heavily on astronomy. Emperors were perceived as cosmic intermediaries, and the ability to accurately predict celestial events validated their divine right to rule. Court astronomers were powerful figures, and princes were educated in lunar cycles, eclipse prediction, and crucial calendar reform. In every culture, the educated ruler didn't merely rule over people. They ruled over time, space, and their perceived destiny. And mathematics and the silent stars served as their most profound advisors. Books could help crown a ruler, but swords were what kept them firmly on the throne. For ancient royalty, education didn't end in the quiet classroom. It extended directly to the dynamic battlefield, where raw courage, physical mastery, and strategic skill were considered as vitally important as philosophy or statecraft. Elite children, especially male heirs, were raised with one unspoken fundamental truth. If you cannot effectively defend your kingdom, someone else will inevitably seize it. In Sparta, this belief was absolute law. Royal sons entered the Agoge, the state's famously brutal military academy, by the tender age of 7. There, they were deliberately stripped of comfort and rigorously trained in pain tolerance, physical endurance, hand-to-hand combat, and intricate battlefield tactics. Even princes were not spared this harsh regimen. They fought, bled, and endured alongside other Spartan boys, forging a profound bond through shared hardship that would serve them well on the front lines. In Persia, royal boys received an education focused on the 3 R's of nobility: riding, archery, and truth-telling. Horsemanship was absolutely essential, not only for warfare but also for royal hunting expeditions, which effectively served as strategic drills. Archery was more than just a skill. It was a powerful symbol of discipline, unwavering focus, and formidable martial prowess. A Persian prince who could not skillfully handle a bow was deemed unfit to rule. India's warrior classes, such as the Kshatriyas, were meticulously trained from a young age in Dhanurveda, the ancient martial science. Royal children learned to proficiently wield swords, spears, maces, and bows. They also delved into the philosophies of war through epic narratives like the Mahabharata, which taught not just how to fight, but why to fight, and what honor truly demanded in the face of death. Egyptian and Mesopotamian princes were also expected to be capable commanders. They practiced chariot driving, spear throwing, and wrestling under the direct guidance of experienced military officers. Pharaohs were often depicted symbolically smiting enemies, but that theatrical image was firmly grounded in real, rigorous military training. Warfare was not theoretical for these rulers. They were expected to lead from the very front lines. In Rome, the young patrician elite were instructed in both virtus, manly courage, and disciplina, discipline. They trained with wooden swords, learned complex formations, and diligently studied military histories. Julius Caesar was not merely a scholar, he was a hardened general, trained from youth to balance the use of both pen and sword. Even Chinese princes, often more insulated by bureaucracy, practiced martial arts, archery, and horseback riding as integral parts of their princely curriculum. The ideal ruler was expected to embody both the civil and the military ideal, the Wen, civil, and the Wu, military. In every ancient empire, education in warfare was not optional, it was a fundamental necessity for survival. For a royal child, a single misplaced word could ignite a war, a glance held for too long could spark a scandal. In ancient courts, knowing how to sit, how to speak, and how to simply smile was as much a powerful weapon as wielding a sharpened sword. Etiquette was not mere superficiality, it was intricate strategy. Behind every graceful bow and lavish banquet lay a complex game of survival, and royal education meticulously drilled this into the heirs of empires. From China to Persia, court etiquette was codified to a level of almost paralyzing precision. In Han China, princes were expected to memorize and rigorously observe the Li ritual codes, which dictated everything from the proper way to greet a superior to how to mourn appropriately. A single breach of protocol could be gravely interpreted as an act of rebellion. Young royals were trained to move with exquisite precision, to speak with carefully measured restraint, and to accurately interpret the subtle power dynamics in every room. In Persia, royal children were meticulously schooled in the art of courtly appearance. This encompassed not just impeccable dress and manners, but also how to gracefully handle envoys, deflect subtle insults, and respond with unwavering poise under immense pressure. They were trained in nuanced, indirect communication, mastering the political doublespeak necessary to survive in a palace teeming with spies and sycophants. In India, Niti Shastra, the science of politics and ethics, was a crucial component of elite education. Texts like the Artha Shastra meticulously outlined how a king must skillfully navigate betrayal, effectively utilize informants, and maintain a delicate balance between diplomacy and force. Royal heirs were expected to grasp these complex concepts early, because one wrong alliance or a single naive gesture could cost them their throne or even their life. The Greeks and Romans also took court behavior with utmost seriousness. Athenian elites were schooled in charis, personal charm, and grace, while Roman boys learned the art of flattery, appropriate public conduct, and subtle surveillance. Julius Caesar was not only trained to fight, he was taught how to skillfully win over senators, subtly undermine rivals, and accurately discern a man's ambition simply by the tone of his voice. In Egypt, etiquette blurred seamlessly with divinity. The pharaoh was not merely royalty, he was considered a living god. Royal children were taught to behave with serene dignity at all times, their very bodies seen as symbols of cosmic order. Even their posture mattered. Their stillness was not passivity, it was profound power and quietude. And always, beneath the polished manners and rigid rituals, lay the constant threat of espionage. Tutors frequently taught princes how to test loyalty, subtly gather secrets, and keenly spot deception. Because in every palace, someone was always watching, and survival depended on watching back with equal vigilance. A royal education was never solely about molding an individual child. It was profoundly about shaping the very future of an entire dynasty. For ancient elites, every lesson in logic, battle strategy, court etiquette, and language carried the immense weight of generations. A well-educated ruler possessed the potential to unite vast kingdoms, stabilize sprawling empires, and achieve immortality in marble and myth. Conversely, a poorly prepared one could unravel everything. In many significant ways, royal education was the empire's ultimate gamble on itself. Every coin minted, every scroll copied, every tutor hired represented a strategic investment in a single person's capacity to hold the realm together. And the pressure on that child, whether prince, princess, or even a pawn, was simply immense. Consider Alexander the Great. His conquest of half the known world wasn't merely fueled by raw ambition or brilliant cavalry tactics. It was deeply rooted in years of meticulously tailored instruction under Aristotle. Aristotle instilled in him an insatiable thirst for knowledge, a passion for rigorous debate, and a profound sense of divine destiny. Alexander didn't simply conquer. He carried with him Greek culture, scientific inquiry, and subtle diplomacy, thereby becoming a powerful symbol of Hellenistic unification. Contrast that with Nero, who was also rigorously trained by none other than the esteemed Stoic philosopher Seneca. He possessed every educational advantage Rome could possibly offer, yet he tragically descended into cruelty, paranoia, and excessive indulgence. His failure wasn't merely personal. It cast a long shadow over the very image of the Roman Empire, igniting widespread revolts and tarnishing Rome's authority for many years. Education, it clearly turned out, was not a guarantee. It was a crucible. For royal women, the stakes were no less grave. A queen consort could ascend to become a powerful regent. A princess could be strategically married off as a peace offering or rise to rule in her own right. The education of figures like Cleopatra or Wu Zetian was not a luxury. It was direct preparation for the immense responsibilities of empire. Their ability to skillfully speak multiple languages, meticulously manage vast treasuries, and deftly navigate deadly court politics kept them alive and firmly in power. Even long after their deaths, the profound impact of these royal educations endured. Many rulers, deeply influenced by their own childhood instruction, became generous patrons of learning, founding grand libraries and temples of knowledge. Their personal experiences then became the very model for future generations, repeated, refined, and ritualized. In the final analysis, the education of the royal child was never solely about the individual child. It was profoundly about legacy, about ensuring that the past did not fade into oblivion, and that the future could be governed with wisdom rather than simply by brute force. Because in the ancient world the throne was inherited, but the crucial ability to successfully keep it, that had to be meticulously taught.